and welcome back to the Kalopsia podcast. I'm your host, Sydney, and I'm thrilled to have you guys here on the pod for this week's episode on conflict. Now, I want to preface by saying that I'm so thankful that so many of you guys have recently subscribed to the channel on YouTube if you like to watch the episodes, and I am so excited about it. I'm so thankful that all of you guys have left such lovely messages, and I am thrilled to have you guys here on the journey, and I hope that you guys enjoy this week's episode as well, as much as you did the last one. And yeah, I just wanted to express my gratitude. I'm really excited that this community seems to actually be attracting like-minded people, and I think that was the original goal, and I'm just really happy about how it's all playing out. But with that, this week I wanted to discuss conflict, and I feel like it's been a common theme in my life in 2025. I feel like it's not been the easiest road for me this year. And it hasn't all been negative. And that's kind of what I want to highlight here, is that I don't think that conflict is an inherently negative thing, but we're taught it is, and we almost expect it to be so. But I kind of wanted to delve a little bit deeper into it. We often think that conflict is bad. It's a negative thing. We're thinking, it's angry, it's a negative type of passion. It's going to give us more stress. It's going to be something that drives us apart, drives people apart, and we often think it's a very negative thing. However, a lot of us are also kind of caught on the flip side, where we know that it's a negative thing. Either it's going to perpetrate the type of person that constantly avoids conflict and constantly tries to run away from it and escape it, or some people who grow up around conflict. We often see that these types of people are going to try to continue to manifest it in their day-to-day lives. And we see this with people who are often in toxic relationships where, if they had a toxic, upbringing or toxic parental relationship that they grew up observing, then those types of people are often going to have toxic relationships in their personal life and continue to seek those out. Sometimes you'll see that they'll finally be in a safe and comfortable and steady relationship, and they're like, oh, something's off here. That's not good either. Where's the spice? What's happening? This feels too easy, right? So there are two different polarizing consequences that can come up after familiarizing yourself with conflict or having experienced a particular conflict. I feel like we have to think about what the goals are behind these two different types of consequences, because inherently, or at the end of the day, I think that we need to find a happy medium, because I think that conflict is something that does belong in our day-to-day living. I think it is something that is necessary for the harmony of our society. I don't think it's something that we should seek out, just like I don't think it's something that we should avoid. But it's necessary for us to be able to tolerate and navigate conflict. And it's necessary that we also open up the floor to conversation about conflict, familiarize ourselves with conflict, so that it's not this big and terrifying thing, and so that we don't unnecessarily attach ourselves to such a thing that can bring about stress and bring about, negative emotions, both psychologically and concretely seen in our relationships. But essentially, something that we'll see with people who tend to avoid conflict is that often maybe they think, okay, if I go into this conflict, it's immediately going to be negative. The, relationship is going to break down. Something terrible is going to happen. I'm not going to be able to navigate it. I think at the end of the day, when it comes to the people who are tending to avoid conflict, is that they may not have as much trust in themselves to be able to come out the other side. If you find yourself constantly avoiding conflict, constantly avoiding conversations, difficult conversations that pose the risk of an outcome that is different from what it was before, that pose the risk of a shift in the dynamic from what it was before, that threatens the security of that friendship or of that relationship or of that parental dynamic. If you find yourself avoiding that kind of conflict, then at the bottom line, what we need to realize is that it's a matter of trust. The moment that you realize that you can trust yourself to get through this type of conflict, this other type of conflict, this other difficult situation, the more you're going to build and tack on votes for the you that is capable of going through negative emotions, negative situations, and coming out the other side. And we've talked about this before when it comes to failure. When it comes to failure and when you fall and you get back up, each fall is another vote for your resilience. It's another vote of confidence in your character. It's another vote towards your capacity to stand your ground when it comes to conflict, or when it comes to your capacity to stick to your guns. If people are telling you, you can't write a book, you'll never be able to do it, why would you write a book? You went to school to be a veterinarian, yeah. To be a vet. Why would you write a book? That's just stupid. So then you try to write something, it's not really catching on. Oh, you try to write something else and it's not really working out. Again and again, you keep trying, eventually you're going to get better. And you're going to see that it paid off for you to stick with that discomfort, for you to push back against that pushback, right? And it's going to help build that confidence. So that's kind of what I'm thinking when it comes to people who tend to avoid conflict, is that you need to build that self-trust, that self-respect, and know that you have the capacity to stand your ground and that you're going to make it through it. But on the other side, there's some of us here, and I feel like I'm more on this side where I'm thinking, where is the conflict? If I'm in a relationship, in a friendship, in something that happens and no conflict has occurred, my alarm bells ring. I'm like, oh, this isn't really safe. Or not that it isn't safe. I hesitate to say that, but when there is a relationship that I am a part of that doesn't have any conflict, I am almost like, I don't trust this relationship to withstand what inherently comes with life. And life comes with conflict. Life comes with ups and downs. Nothing is smooth sailing. I think that is the biggest rule in adulthood, is that nothing ever comes easily. And just when you think you've resolved an issue, another one's going to pop up. So that is just, if you're like 16 listening to this, I am sorry. That is the reality. But the better thing, the flip side, right? The better side of the coin is that each failure, each conflict, each disappointment helps us build that self-trust, helps us build that confidence in ourselves. And just like we talked about last week with the resurgence of critical thinking and the resurgence of trying to lean into growth and trying to learn, and how learning inherently makes you feel weak at first, how learning inherently makes you feel dumb, it makes you feel vulnerable, it makes you feel inadequate, right? But then you're going to grow through that. And I feel like the same thing happens in relationships. I feel like a relationship in which nothing negative occurs is almost like you're not really growing, you're not really building, you're not really leaning into each other and fueling each other towards building stronger relationships or building better strength within yourself. But the problem with the type of thinking of seeking that out and constantly looking for reasons to create conflict is that your relationships are going to suffer, right? And this isn't rocket science. Your relationships are going to suffer. You are going to suffer. It is not psychologically beneficial for us to remain in states of conflict for long periods of time. It is inherently going to bring stress into our lives, which is inherently going to diminish our immune systems, which is then going to affect our health and affect our, mental health, because those are closely intertwined. It's going to have negative effects. We know this. But how do we find that middle ground? How do we not avoid conflict in its entirety, but also not seek it out and think to ourselves, I need conflict to prove that this relationship is good. I need conflict to prove to me that this, man is my one. I need that proof that they're going to stick with me through the end, because we've gotten all these tests and because we are able to, supersede all of these obstacles, right? How do we find that middle ground? And I feel like when I'm thinking about that question, it reminds me of the episode that I did a while back on vulnerability, and how I genuinely think that being vulnerable throughout your day-to-day life is one of the bravest things anybody can do, and I truly stand by that. I feel like when you are of the side in which you are constantly avoiding conflict, you're almost inherently going to be a more outwardly positive person, And I feel like it's going to be leaning into that side of people pleasing and thinking, I don't want anybody to be upset. I want everybody to be happy. So I'm not even going to try to, speak my mind about this thing that frustrated me. I'm not going to mention it because I think that is going to create some conflict and that could be stressful. It's going to open up the unknown, that's going to be really difficult. So I'm actually not going to be vulnerable, and I'm going to be outwardly positive, outwardly, helpful or funny or enjoyable to be around, and that's the way I'm going to present myself, so that I avoid conflict and so that everybody stays happy, right? But the truth is that in portraying that people-pleasing attitude, and I don't even say that in a necessarily negative way, I think I can be a people pleaser as well. I think people pleasing is only negative when you are inherently putting yourself down and your mental health, your physical health at risk, or putting that below, other people, which I mean, a lot of people pleasers do. But essentially, I feel like when you are constantly people pleasing or constantly looking to help others around you feel the best that they can feel, you're not being vulnerable. And I think that that's the difficult thing to realize. And a few months back, my friend had even told me, Sydney, our emotions aren't your responsibility. Because I was always thinking oh, how are you doing? How are you doing? And I was kind of just I was juggling everybody's emotions. We had gone on a trip and I was okay, she's feeling this way and she's feeling this way. Maybe if I say this, this will help them to get along. And so if I do this and this will help them to get along, what ends up happening when you're trying to juggle other people's emotions and juggle other people's perceptions of the situation at hand, it's going to not only make their kind of flow and their relationship kind of feel almost fabricated because it is being inherently facilitated by an external force, but also it's going to be negatively impacting you because in consistently taking care of other people's perceptions, other people's emotional planets, you are not tending to your own. And you are not, being vulnerable, wearing your heart on your sleeve, But the same thing is true for people who are on the flip side, for people who see conflict, for people who want those tests, who want that, head to head, so that everybody's thoughts are laid out on the table, everybody's, on the same page, we're all just speaking our piece, because a lot of the time when you're on that side of thinking, I need to speak my mind, I need to make everybody know what I'm thinking, what my stances are, I'm strong in my values and my values will not be, shifted, they will not be, these types of thoughts that could be included in those of people who tend to seek out conflict and who want conflict to happen, in that side, you're also not being vulnerable because you're almost building a hard shell around yourself and thinking, this is my persona that I'm building up. This is my persona. I'm this tough person. I'm this tough person that loves confrontation. I'm this tough person that, you're not going to mess with. And I'm this tough person that I'm not going to take it. I'm not going to take it when people put me down. I'm not going to take it. But what you're doing is, when you're also doing that, is you're not allowing that softness to come out. You're not allowing other emotions to filter through. And I feel like I had actually watched a TikTok from this therapist who was working with a client, and this woman had said, she was talking about this difficult situation that she had gone through, and she was thinking, she was walking through her experience, and she had recounted, and she said, oh, this is what happened to me. And then immediately she started shaking her head, and her face shuddered, and she was pursing her lips and just frowning and just shaking her head like this. And the therapist was thinking, oh, from what she just told me, she should be crying. Honestly, she should be crying. This like experience that she went through, what she is telling me about, is something that a person who is more attuned to their feelings would be devastated about, and hence would probably emote in the form of tears streaming down one's face. That is the type of outward emotion that would be perceived due to that experience. However, what it was instead happening was that this client was just shaking her head, pursing her lips, and the therapist actually identified the emotion with disgust. And she identified it with disgust, and disgust was actually a front for the emotions that were actually underlining what she was experiencing, which was actually sadness and anger, right? Sadness and disappointment. Sadness being the biggest root of the cause, the biggest root of it. And I feel like that is what happens when we have people who are constantly looking for conflict, constantly looking for this, because it's a front and it doesn't allow you to actually experience the bottom emotion that is underlining this coping mechanism. Because I feel like they are both coping mechanisms, both avoidance and confrontation, consistent confrontation, that is. But how do we reach that middle ground? Coming back to the whole aspect of vulnerability being one of the bravest things that we can do, but also one of the most beneficial things that we can do. When you are faced with a situation in which you're thinking, oh, that rubbed me the wrong way, and instead of, kind of saying something, then you kind of you smile and you rub it off, you shake it off, and it's like, oh, it's fine. I don't really want to ruffle any feathers right now. That's not really what I'm trying to do right now, so I'll just let it blow over. You let it blow over. Again, you let it blow over a sixth time, you let it blow over a 10th time, and then all of a sudden you explode, right? But I think that what we need to do is actually emote. And I think that what is going to happen is that it's going to be more uncomfortable at first, but I think it's better in the long run. And I feel like this is something that it's both a negative and a positive thing, is that I actually express a lot of my feelings on my face. You won't be able to tell typically exactly how I'm feeling by the look on my face, and it's not something that I can typically control. I can control it at times, but typically only after somebody points it out. So sometimes, my eyebrows will twitch, or I'm gonna frown a little, or I'm gonna be like, oh, like that's a little she said what? And then I'm like, oh wait, maybe I shouldn't have made that face, I'm just like what's happening? And I feel like at the bottom line, I'm very grateful for my expressiveness, because it makes it more difficult for me to be not vulnerable. It makes it more difficult for me not to wear my heart on my sleeve. It makes it more difficult for me to be this hyper confrontational or hyper avoidant person. It makes me exposed. But that kind of exposure is beneficial. It's beneficial because those around me are going to say, oh, maybe Sydney didn't like that. Oh, maybe that rubbed her the wrong way. Oh, maybe I shouldn't say that. And I think that we ignore the debt that we have to others, that is to help each other grow as people. And I think this also goes back to the discussion we had a few months back of collectivist societies versus individualistic societies, and how when my friend told me that our emotions are not your responsibility, that was almost an individualistic society standpoint, in that I should really only be worried about my personal emotional planet. I should not be tasked with tending to and gearing myself towards helping the harmony of the group in which I was found, and helping everybody else get along, because at the bottom line in this North American individualistic society, that really isn't my responsibility. I think that statement was also it was interesting because because in that sense I was almost in a people-pleasing attitude, right? But then on the flip side, when I'm thinking about if I were to instead have blown up and thought to myself, this is bad, this I didn't like, this I didn't like, this I didn't like, then what you're doing is also you're not listening to the other side. But right? All of this is also reminding me of La vie est un art is the episode is the podcast that I mentioned in last week's episode. It's a French podcast all about positive psychology. And a couple of episodes stuck out to me that kind of related to this week's episode. And one of them was, oh my goodness, nobody ever listens to me was the topic of the episode. I'll put up the podcast title in the picture right here, but basically, this man had came onto the podcast and said, I specialize in helping people feel heard in conversations, helping people feel understood in conflicts. And I feel like the biggest thing that I took away from his explanation was that in order to move through conflict, in order to feel heard, and in order to feel understood, you must begin by understanding. And you cannot begin by understanding if you do not begin by listening. When it comes to conflict, when it comes to people-pleasing or hyper-confrontational personalities, you have to maintain the understanding that both sides need to be understood for the conversation to blow over smoothly. If you're on the standpoint of avoidance and you have an issue with someone, or somebody comes to you with an issue and you are solely listening to them, solely understanding their standpoint, solely giving room and breath for their side of the story, you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're also actually doing them a disservice, because all they're doing is listening to their own speech, coming to a deeper understanding with their own perspective, and they're not going to come out of that situation with a better understanding of how another person might internalize the way that they speak to others, how another might internalize their communication pattern, or how they can also deal with somebody pushing back against their thoughts and feelings. You're doing them a disservice by also people-pleasing when it comes into these types of conflicts. But on the flip side, when you are hyper-confrontational, when you are only speaking, thinking to yourself, this is my stance, this is where you went wrong, this is how you wronged me, this is what you did, then you're going to you're going to put them at a disadvantage, because you're not even listening to their side of the story. So this other person actually isn't even going to be willing to understand and internalize your stance and internalize your views, because why should they listen to you if you're not even listening to them? So that's one thing that stuck with me about La vie est un art. The second thing that stuck with me is how there was an episode on this woman specialized in nonverbal communication. She called it CNV, which is like communication non violente. Yeah, I think. Communication non violente. And basically, she was discussing the impact that our body has when it comes to conflict, and the impact that our body has in our perception of where we are at in our capacity to internalize and our capacity to even have difficult conversations, and how valuable introspection is when it comes to conflict. Because with her whole concentration being on nonviolent communication, of course, you're going to have people who, and I think she came to this confusion because a lot of people burn out, right? Like we just said, maybe you'll people please 6 times, 7 times, 8 times, 9 times, 10 times. That 10th time you burn out, you explode. And that's where you find yourself in situations where it could get violent, or where it could get scary, or where it could get so blown up out of proportion because you didn't stand up for yourself at the very beginning. And I think that that's where we have to have that type of introspection of thinking, okay, how do I feel about this conflict right now? Am I burning up inside because I cannot even fathom, this other side of the perspective, this other perspective that's being brought to my attention? Maybe I need to take a step back. Maybe this isn't the conflict that I'm meant to be a part of. Maybe this isn't something that I have enough skin in the game for. Maybe I don't even care about this conflict, and maybe instead I need to take a step back. And now the episode I was listening to was one about discernment and one about making choices. And I think that this is also something that we need to bring up when we talk about conflict, is that not all conflict requires us to show up for. We don't need to show up for every piece of conflict, I think is what I'm trying to say. Conflict is necessary for harmony, and I think it's necessary for longevity in relationships in the doses in which it's required, of course, or I'm not saying it needs to be a blow-up fight, but I think understanding each other's communication styles and understanding each other's values can often come in differences in opinion. And that often leads to some sort of conflict or discussion, heated discussion. That can also just be a conflict. But in her episode, again, I'll put it up on the screen, about discernment, she was discussing how sometimes you think to yourself, okay, I am having a problem with my boyfriend, and then immediately you think to yourself, oh, I need to break up with him. I need to break up with him. Like, that's the only solution here. Like, I need to leave. Like, I totally need to go. But what happens when you do that is that you're not actually going to the root of the issue and thinking to yourself, okay, what is it that I truly want out of this situation? What is it that I truly want from this person? Why am I discontent? Right now, this can also happen with a job, right? That's the example she drew, where if you, for example, are in a relationship and you're thinking to yourself, he doesn't listen to me, or I need better support when it comes to household, necessities, or I need more support emotionally, or, I feel like I'm not really being listened to when it comes to my passions or something like that, right? None of these things had to do with his actual character. None of these had to do with his actual way of being or his actions towards you, more so lackings, right? So maybe instead of thinking, I need to break up with my boyfriend, I'm thinking, okay, wait, my needs aren't being met. So maybe what I can do, since we have different communication styles, is that I'm actually going to bring in a mediator so that our points can be better drawn across, and then we're going to be able to reach a more harmonious conclusion. And I'm happy because I'm still with my partner that I love so dearly, and I'm happier because he's also going to be helping me out. And then maybe he was also feeling that I was lacking in some ways that I wasn't even capable of listening to, and so now we're kind of in a more harmonious conclusion. But now if you're thinking to yourself, okay, the conflict is actually my job. I hate my job and I feel like it's such a difficult situation because I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to get a new job because of the state of the job market at this time. And, I'm not going to be sure that I'm going to be able to get a new job, but I despise my job. It brings me so much stress. I'm so unhappy when I go in. I hate it. I hate it here. It's horrible. And that is the way that you think to yourself. It's like, it doesn't align with my values. It doesn't align with my intentions in my life. It doesn't align with how I want to portray myself to society. It makes me feel badly about myself. These types of things, you're not going to be able to go to your workplace and say, I want this to change because maybe your position is inherently different to those values, different to what you are looking for. And in that case, conflict, going back and forth with your workplace, with your supervisor, with whoever, it's not even worth your energy. And that's where discernment has to come in. In that first situation, the better option was to stay and discuss. In the second example, maybe the better option is to not stay and discuss, but rather to leave. And maybe you're going to find a different solution that you wouldn't even have come up with just because you were able to have that better understanding of your intention, and then you can transform that intention and create a new, work opportunity for yourself or something like that. I had another episode on using your intention and stuff like that. If you guys want to check it out, I'll leave it in the description. But it's going to help us understand a little bit better where our energy is needed in the conflict. Do I need to put my all into this? Do I need to, scream and shout and let it out, let it all out? Or do I need to instead take a step back and think, okay, we are not on the same field right now. Maybe this isn't even worth my energy. Maybe we are just at an impasse and coming to that understanding that this impasse is where the road ends and this is where I end, this is where I stop. And, nobody can come to that conclusion but you. But I think that when it comes to conflict, the biggest things that we need to think about are, number one, that in order to be heard, we need to listen. Number two, we need to have discernment of whether this conflict is even something that we want to be a part of or are capable of being a part of, because maybe we have too much anger built up. Maybe we are not in a space of being able to internalize what the other person is saying. But also we need to remember that it's important to be of service not only to ourselves but of others, and show up to the conversation ready to communicate your point but also ready to listen to the other person's point. We don't want to be completely avoidant and letting other people walk all over us, but we also don't want to be walking all over other people. But the bottom line is that conflict can be the path to harmony. But I think that we need to learn how to do it right in ways that don't put others down, but also that don't allow us to be overlooked and ignored. Okay, you guys, I think that's all I have for you guys today. A bit of a change of pace for those who listened to last week's episode, but I feel like if you liked that one, then you might like this one too. But anyway, I really enjoyed having you guys on this week's episode with me. I genuinely enjoy these discussions that we have, and I love seeing your guys' comments. Most importantly, I feel so inspired, and feel free to leave a comment. Feel free to leave a review, you guys. That would be great if you hop over to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. Please leave a review. And don't forget to reach out at kalopsiapod, at KALOPSIAPOD on Instagram and TikTok, and at Sydney Jotita, SYDNEYDJOTITA on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, of course. And I hope that you guys really enjoyed this week's episode. If you want me to discuss anything in particular, feel free to leave it in the comments or let me know. But I am thrilled with the progress that we're all making here, and I'm thrilled that you guys are enjoying the content, and I'm so grateful for all of your kind messages. Again, I cannot express how grateful I am, and I hope to see you guys on the pod again, and I will see you next week. Bye.